A monstrous betrayal of Pakistani rape gang victims has happened today. GB News understands that the survivors panel at the heart of the rape gang inquiry is going to be scrapped from January, with a new panel set up once the inquiry starts. But this is a disgusting betrayal. Sir Keir Starmer made a vow to survivors and stressed that he wanted survivors to be at the heart of the inquiry when he announced that national inquiry in June 2025. Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood also insisted that the process is designed to ensure that victims' voices shape the inquiry. And just months ago, several survivors resigned from the panel, accusing Jess Phillips of calling them liars.
We must avoid delays, as was seen in the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, and are progressing as swiftly as thoroughness allows. Misinformation undermines this process. Allegations of intentional delay, lack of interest, or widening of the inquiry's scope and dilution are false. The inquiry will remain laser-focused on grooming gangs, as Baroness Casey recommended.
And today we find out that the Labour government is now scrapping that victims panel. Elizabeth Harper, who was abused in Rotherham from the age of 14, told the Metro, "How can you say it is survivor-led when you are going to scrap the panel? All the way through the process, it has not been focused on survivors at all." And what else happened today? Well, the government announces Anne Longfield as the new chair of this grooming gangs inquiry. Well, who is she? She's a Labour peer. Now, bear in mind that this inquiry is really supposed to unearth a link between the Pakistani Muslim community and the industrial-scale rape of predominantly working-class white girls. She seems like an odd choice. She's previously called for a national mission to identify and remove racial bias in the systems that are currently failing black, brown and minority ethnic children. Last month, she called for education leaders to commit to embedding a culture of anti-racism into the heart of their schools. She actually used to be the chair of the Children's Commission. Well, in 2013, 2 years before Baroness Longfield took over, the Children's Commission published a report into child grooming that was absolutely panned for downplaying the Pakistani aspect of it. Then, when the Baroness took over, one of her first acts was to allow the previous deputy chair, who failed to speak out about abuse by Pakistani gangs and criticised the media for being too fixated on Pakistani perpetrators, to take a very cushy redundancy package and then be rehired as a consultant. This decision was then reversed because it breached government rules. And at the time, the Children's Commissioner argued that she was only rehired for a limited number of days. It was necessary, was it? Because the importance and sensitivity of the work she was employed to carry out. Well, she's now in charge of this inquiry. And then this happened today. Have a little listen to what Shabana Mahmood says here.
A personal perspective, and based on my own constituency experience, that of my family, my friends, the community that I belong to back home in Birmingham, there is nothing Muslim or Islamic about the acts that these evil men have perpetrated. It is not behaviour that any of us would accept or tolerate. All of these things are crimes, and I don't know anybody that doesn't believe that these people should be locked up for a very, very long time.
Well, I'm sorry, but the links between Islam and the grooming gangs is precisely something this inquiry is supposed to be looking at. A new academic report by Christian Concern did claim that there was a link, with some victims even reporting having verses of the Quran quoted to them whilst they were being raped and abused. The report identified links between fundamentalist Islamic interpretations of male dominance over women and how it's acceptable to treat non-believers, and the way in which white Christian girls were abused. Well, I'm sorry, but to me this looks a lot like yet another massive stitch-up. No survivors panel until the inquiry starts, which means that, of course, they won't get the chance to approve this new chair of the inquiry, who, by the way, is a Labour peer with a pretty woke track record, and a Home Secretary who's already doing everything she can to say that there is no link between the rape gangs and Islam. Let's get thoughts on my panel. We've got GB News contributor Will Kingston. We've also got political commentators Suzanne Evans and Jonathan Liss. Yeah, Will, I mean, this looks like yet another incredibly dark day for the treatment of victims and survivors of the Pakistani rape gangs.
Patrick, I was sitting in that chair just over there when Charlie Peters announced that Keir Starmer had been dragged kicking and screaming to an inquiry, in large part by GB News, as an aside. And there was a general feeling of relief across that table, but there was also that feeling in the pit of our collective stomachs that this would be a sham. And the reason we thought it would be a sham is because as it was run by Labor, it would be literally impossible for it to be objective. It's impossible for it to be objective because so much of this has happened in Labor-run councils. It's impossible for it to be objective because they pick who runs the inquiry. And guess what? As you said, it's a Labor peer. It's impossible for it to be objective because the culture and ideology of multiculturalism, which has in part created this problem, has been the religion of Labor for over 20 years now. If they wanted to do this seriously, they should have divorced themselves from the process. They should have found a judge from somewhere in the Commonwealth to run it, and they should have said, this is going to be politically neutral. They haven't done that, and all I can say is my heart breaks for the survivors of what is the greatest tragedy in modern UK history.
Should just clarify something as well, that one of the reasons why... Oh, actually, sorry, I'm just going to go to you, Jonathan. You were pulling a face at the idea that this is one of the greatest tragedies in modern history. Is that...
I think that we have to put all of this into perspective. And, Patrick, I did find it offensive what you said a second ago about directly linking Islam to this, to these crimes.
You can take that up with the authors of a report, who are academics who quoted the fact that in victim statements they were saying that verses of the Quran were being quoted to them. They were being told that this was happening to them because they were non-believers, and also there are aspects of the Islamic doctrine that would appear under a fundamentalist interpretation of that to allow this kind of abuse towards non-believers. That's not my...
Are we going to have an inquiry into the abuse of Catholic priests in which we try and establish a link between sort of paedophilia and the Catholic and the Catholic?
To make excuses for
I'm not. I'm saying that I think we have to be consistent.
That's how it might come across.
No, well, I'm saying that if that would have been grossly offensive, if someone had said at the time of the paedophile priest scandal, which was a huge scandal,
I don't think. I'll tell you what I would have said at the time. I'll tell you what I would have said at the time.
To say that's because of Catholicism would be very offensive.
If there was girls that were being abused and that part of that abuse was being conducted by men who were using the religion of Catholicism as a way of doing it, I would have welcomed that inquiry and I would have welcomed that investigation.
That is what happened.
And I would have I would have welcomed it. Absolutely.
It is what happened.
So why is it offensive?
It would have been, but people.
So why is it offensive?
If you had that is what happened. But if you had sought to say, is there something in the Catholic religion which is causing priests to be paedophiles, people would have found that extremely offensive.
Well, I'm sorry, but your feelings don't matter. The feelings that I care about are the victims and survivors and the people who had copies and quotes from the Quran shouted at them whilst they were being gang raped. I think that is a more important thing to get to the bottom of than whether or not someone somewhere is offended, Susan.
I agree. I mean, you say that's offensive, Jonathan. I find it utterly offensive that you're even bringing up that idea that Patrick can't quote a report on a television station that is there in black and white in the public eye. And you're calling it offensive. And then you drag Roman Catholicism into it, and obviously we all utterly condemn what happened. And I think it is very clear that there was a connection between the role of the priest and the abuse of that role and the abuse that went on. And I'm pretty sure that that's happening in Islam as well. And the thing about this is that there are so many people in positions of power who've got too much to lose by the truth coming out here and some really condemnatory report. You've got local councillors, you've got local MPs, you've got local imams, you've got social workers, you've got the police. The layers of people that are involved in this and the abuse that went on, they want this covered up. And my worry is that Baroness Longfield, third time lucky, I don't think it's going to be. I don't think she's the right person because of the scandal involving the redundancy and rehiring of her deputy that you mentioned. Also, when she was Children's Commissioner in 2015, this was not a priority for her. It's not something she's spoken about. It's not something that's been on her radar, which I find Shabina Mahmood's comments completely offensive. We know that this is happening in the Islamic community. We know that the Islamic community has hushed it up and covered it up. And if you've got a Home Secretary who's not prepared to accept that, where's this report going to go? It frightens me.
Jonathan, the overwhelming majority of perpetrators in the grooming gangs, or rape gangs, which you would say, were Pakistani Muslim men. At the very, very least, there is a correlation there. Are you suggesting that that correlation shouldn't be investigated in this inquiry?
I'm not saying that you can't explore the identity of the people who are responsible for grooming gangs, and I think that actually you need to put it into the broader context of child sexual abuse, which is overwhelmingly a white male pursuit.
Why are you so desperate to ignore?
Because I would
you want me to do quite a lot of mental gymnastics.
I would flip it. I would flip it on its head. I would say that
You're
there are.
the Emily Maitlis approach.
I know. No.
We care about this because we're racist. Is that right?
No. I would. Because the racism. That's what you're putting words into my mouth.
The racism that was at play here was the racism displayed against working class white girls.
Yeah.
They were sexually abused because, in large part, because they were white and they were seen as lesser than. And if this was happening any other way round, if the same thing had happened and it was black cab drivers who were white who had done this on an industrial scale to young Muslim girls, there would have been riots in the streets, and you bet your bottom dollar we would have had an inquiry into
Patrick, I think it's completely legitimate to ask why certain victims were singled out, what the motivations might have been on the part of the perpetrators. I have no problems with that whatsoever. I'm not going to preach a doctrine of political correctness in all this to say that you can't ask certain questions. I do think, however, that when you try to make broad associations between a religion and you're choosing to focus on the perpetrators of a specific type of sexual crime who are of that ethnicity, rather than the broader child sex abuse
Unfortunately for you, Jonathan,
scandal.
that's exactly what this is about, all right? You can have a different inquiry into something else if you want, but this inquiry really is about that.
And there are plenty of white perpetrators in the grooming gangs as well. There are so many, and people don't care when it comes out. Because they're white, it doesn't fit the narrative.
Look, the majority population is white. Of course, most people involved in rape are going to be white. But the fact is, when it comes to this specific phenomenon, as Will said, it is mainly Pakistani and to a lesser extent Bangladeshi men who are involved in this.
Let's just focus.
And you can't ignore that as a fact.
No, let's just focus a bit on another aspect that's gone on today, of course, is the scrapping of this victim and survivors panel. Now, we were relentlessly told that they were going to be at the heart of this. You might remember that a few months ago, some of them resigned. They felt as though Jess Phillips had disparaged them. They weren't happy with the direction of travel. They thought that there was going to be a broadening of the scope of this inquiry to deviate away from predominantly the Pakistani aspects of it and towards a more broad thing, which, of course, Jonathan will be banging in favour of. However, they were told, no, don't worry, that's not happening. And then they were told that they would get a say over who was going to take over from this as the chair. Well, it turns out now that they've appointed a chair and they're scrapping the panel and they're going to reintroduce the panel a little bit later on, which conveniently allows the victims no say over this Labour peer who's in charge of it now.
Yeah, I haven't heard a formal rationale for why this has been dropped, but the obvious conclusion is that survivors have lost all confidence that this inquiry will have any credibility whatsoever. The last time I checked, I think it was 6 or 7 survivors who had pulled out when they still thought that it was worthwhile to perhaps get the voices of the people who had been raped as part of this awful scandal. And now they've obviously realised that these survivors have lost all faith in it, and as a result of that, they're not going to be able to pull together a panel that would go along with it. It is a complete and damning indictment on this process.
The survivors are basically being abused again through this story, this saga, and it's not just rape, it's torture, it's murder. It's appalling. And the fact that so many people seem prepared to completely brush this under the carpet and, frankly, talk about irrelevancies, sorry, Jonathan, as a consequence, is disgusts me.
What's irrelevant, sorry?
Irrelevant. You trying to make out that, it's white men did this as well.
Not trying to make it out.
We know that.
I'm stating facts. If you don't like them,
we
that's
mustn't
not
talk
here
about
nor there.
religion, it's dangerous, it's not fair on the particular religion. Well, I'm sorry, as far as I'm concerned, and I consider myself to be a Christian, but a religion is an open book. It should not be immune from criticism. If there's a connection, it should be explored.
I'm asking what the motivation is and what good it does.
The motivation is to get to the truth about what happened to these girls and to try and stop it happening again. But unless we actually face these issues head on, which might not be politically correct, which might not be woke, which might upset people, which some people like you might find offensive, it's going to keep happening again and again and again.
To impugn an entire religion for the actions of a tiny minority of its adherents.
Well, you were quite happy to impugn all of Roman Catholicism.
I literally said it would be offensive. I said the opposite of what you just said.
Can I respond to that? No one, including Patrick, is saying that every Muslim is a grooming gang perpetrator. No one is saying that. The difference between white grooming or rape gangs in this country and Pakistani Muslim rape gangs is that if there is a white rape gang in this country, they have been addressed, they have been put in prison, they've been given what they deserved as quickly as possible. No one turned a blind eye. Because of the fact that these were Pakistani Muslim men, the establishment turned a blind eye for decades. That is the cultural distinction.
That is your allegation. I look forward to the report establishing whether that's true. But there are plenty of white grooming gangs. It would also taken a very, very long time to come to justice. The idea that white people are dealt with immediately, women always believe when it's white people, that's not true either.
I think what's happening here, because it's actually the second night in a row that I've had a representative from the left on who has said some, I would argue, really quite questionable things. The first one was yesterday when it was about the Afghan rapists who were small boat migrants, and that person appeared to be jumping through hoops to say that there's nothing kind of in Afghan culture or all that. It was all men. And then Jonathan, today, it does appear to me that you are doing quite a lot to try to take a little bit of a focus off aspects of the British Pakistani community. And I think what we're living through in real time here is your fear that your worldview and multiculturalist view is about to come crashing down around your ankles, and you can't have that.
I would level the same accusation at the other side, actually, that people are always... I agree that there are some people who worry about their worldview being questioned. My worldview, Patrick, does not depend on everyone being a saint.
Well, but that's because in the past you sat on this sofa and you have been very vocal about the idea that you don't think certain cultures are more likely to oppress and abuse women. So if I've
never said no. I've never said it in those terms.
Right.
I'm not saying that every single culture in the world is like Sweden or Norway. Absolutely not. What I do say that cultures.
What happened to Sweden, out of interest? They introduced another culture, didn't they? And they have seen quite a huge increase in sexual crimes against women, quite famously so.
Look. In Sweden, I was in Sweden this weekend. Sweden is still a fantastic country. It's got huge gender equality. I'm not saying that it's perfect. I'm not saying that people have assimilated perfectly. And of course, there are crimes. And of course, migrants are human beings and they also commit crimes.
Right. Okay.
Multiculturalism has been in the sense that this idea that you can come to this country and continue the ways of your own culture has been a complete and utter disaster, to the point where white girls abused by Pakistani Muslim men were sent home to their parents and told that they were prostitutes, basically, even though they were underage. They couldn't possibly have been prostitutes. It was statutory rape, and the police turned a blind eye to it. Unfortunately, because frightened of being attacked by people like you, Jonathan, for calling them rapists.
People like me, Suzanne. Do you think that white girls are also guilty of... do you think that white girls can also be raped by white men? Is that also not a problem?
Yes,
right, so this is not... It's not just... Pakistanis are not the only people raping people in this country.
What this inquiry is about.
Very final word to Will, and then we've got to go.
It is of no doubt that in countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan, women are treated as second-class citizens. It is obvious, therefore, that if those people come to the country, there is a greater likelihood that those men will hold those attitudes and commit those crimes. And it is imperative that culture, therefore, is part of this inquiry.
Yeah, OK. And it appears today, just to bring us full circle, it appears today that there has been a step away from that, both with the person who's now in charge of the inquiry, the shunning, at least in the initial phases of the victims, and, of course, as well, what the Home Secretary said in the House of Commons. Confirming their decision, the Home Office told the Metro victim and survivor engagement remains central to this inquiry, and the terms of reference reflect that. The survivor panel, which supported the Home Office during the set-up phase, was always intended to be time-limited. It will wind down in January. We've worked closely with victims and survivors throughout development, and that will continue. As we move into the next phase, victims and survivors will have opportunities to engage directly with the inquiry and through the separate long-term child sexual abuse victim and survivor panel at the Home Office is establishing. We'll make of that what you will, but I maintain this is a pretty dark day again. Why can't we just do this properly? What is it people are trying to hide? But anyway,